Good morning, class, and welcome to a rainy Monday in oceanography. Today, we will be reviewing for the Unit 4 quiz. The Unit 4 quiz is due Wednesday. We will also transition into our next unit this week. Today, we'll be taking a little tour of the Boyd Hill Nature Preserve and looking at the hydrology of an estuary. My original plan was to watch videos associated with the virtual field trip, but I found myself putting together a little PowerPoint tour, and that way you can watch the videos, but still get all of the I'd like to cover the actual hydrology of it a little more in depth. So what our plan is today is to first review for the quiz that you'll be taking Wednesday. Just go through the review sheet. It is posted online in the packet, the quiz packet. Then we will look over the assignment, the virtual field trip assignment. Then we will take a tour of Boyd Hill. There are a bunch of videos online for you to watch from Boyd Hill on location. So that will wrap up today's lesson. Wednesday, we'll hold a similar lesson regarding the most important feature of our coastal ecosystems, the barrier island. And we will be looking at, for the field trip, the virtual field trip, we'll be looking at Fort DeSoto. So that is Wednesday. Wednesday is Fort DeSoto. Let's begin. I'll make note. There are, I published this lecture to YouTube for the online oceanography class so they can get notes as well. So because they do like, a few people do like to watch the lecture. So I'll point out to that you guys, for those that are watching on YouTube in the future, that this assignment and the Fort DeSoto assignments are optional assignments at the end of the class. So this is pertinent for that as well. All right, moving right into the quiz 4 review. The Earth's obliquity. Carson, I see you got you right in front of me, so I'm going to have to ask you, do you remember what the term obliquity means?
Is it, I don't really know. Is it like the uneven shape of it, or?
That's close. That's close. That's oblate, the uneven shape. So they both begin with O. The oblate spheroid is the uneven shape of Earth, but the obliquity is our axial tilt. So Earth is tilted on its axis, and because of that, we get uneven heating. That determines the seasons. So the latitude of the tropics, which is 23.5 degrees north, 23.5 degrees south, the latitude of the tropics is equal to the axial tilt. The axial tilt is 23.5 degrees. So the Tropic of Cancer in the north is 23.5 degrees north. The Tropic of Capricorn in the south is 23.5 degrees south. And anywhere in that range from 23.5 north to 23.5 south, the sun can be found directly overhead during some point of our trip around the sun. So more direct sunlight occurs in those tropics, and that determines the 4 seasons on our planet. Now, the Arctic and Antarctic circles are 23.5 degrees from 90, which means they're 66.5 degrees north or south. And that fact, again, lends to the cooler climate because the angle of incoming solar radiation. It's a very steep angle, so it's cold. So Earth's obliquity is the tilt. We determine the special lines of latitude by that, the tropics, 23.5 degrees north and south, equal to the obliquity. And then the Arctic, Antarctic, 66.5 degrees north and south. And that's the 90, the North Pole, minus the obliquity. And then the dates, the height of the sun, the angle of insolation, which stands for incoming solar radiation, and hours of daylight, they all vary because of that obliquity. Autumn and vernal equinox, the equinoxes we have, that stands for the equal day, equal night, 12 hours of daylight, 12 hours of night. The sun's direct sunlight is found over the equator. The winter solstice is when the northern hemisphere is tilted 23.5 degrees away from the sun. Okay, so that's the maximum leaning away from the sun there is. Because it's leaning away from the sun, the angle of insolation is the least. It's not 90 degrees, it's far less than that. So it's very indirect sunlight, and that's why it's cold. And because we're leaning away from the sun, we have the least hours of daylight and most hours of darkness. The summer solstice is the opposite. The northern hemisphere is leaning 23.5 degrees toward the sun. So it's the greatest lean toward the sun. Therefore, we get the most direct sunlight in the northern hemisphere. We have the longest hours of daylight in the northern hemisphere, and the most direct insolation or incoming solar radiation. You would probably be well served to be able to draw Earth orbiting the sun and label the 4 points and know the facts, the dates, and what we just talked about. How does the density of air and water relate to its rising and falling? Convection. Well, we know that more dense fluid, and air and water are both fluids, sink. Least or less dense fluid rises. Density of water depends on salinity and temperature. Air, mainly temperature, because there's no salinity. So those convection cells transfer energy due to density differences. Explain the Coriolis effect. Well, we went through that with the Earth rotating under a moving fluid, and everything in the northern hemisphere bends to the right. So it's clockwise around a high pressure and counterclockwise around a low pressure system. We do have gyras, those curved ocean currents, and our global winds also are curved because of Coriolis effect. Speaking of the global winds, review the different wind cells and the terminology, the doldrums, which is right at the equator, and then the trades, north or south of the equator, and the westerlies, that's your subtropical cell, and then your polar cell, the easterlies, and those horse latitudes that line between the trades and the westerlies. Winds are named from the direction that they come from, and hurricanes form over warm water, not just the warm Atlantic water and the tropical currents, but that's where we get ours, but those tropical currents in all the hemispheres are capable of forming hurricanes or typhoons if the spin is opposite. Not typhoon, as I just read on the automatic voice translator, but typhoon. Deep ocean currents are thermohaline, so density differences caused by salinity and temperature. Surface currents are driven by the trade winds and the westerlies. Ocean currents moderate heat budget by bringing warm water toward the north and south poles on the currents and bringing cooler water toward the equator on the closing loop of that gyra. Eastern and western boundary currents, you're going from the center of the ocean. So an eastern boundary current is on the west side of a continent and they're warm. A western boundary current's on the east side of a continent. Sorry, and they're warm. Eastern boundary currents are on the west side of a continent and they're cold. I misspoke. And it's easy to get them confused. Western boundary currents like the Gulf Stream are on the eastern portions of continents. Coastal upwelling is generally caused by winds blowing over land, forcing that water out to sea and bringing up deeper water. And they are nutrient rich, very, very high biodiversity. The Sargasso Sea is the North Atlantic gyra. It's named after the Gulf weed, which is a brown algae called sargassum. What causes most waves? That would be our wind-driven waves. Remember, we have wind-driven waves. We have gravity, which are tides, and we have seismic activities, which are tsunamis. There's also a special wave called the storm surge, which is really a half wave. Waves break at a depth of L/3. The three factors that determine the height of a wind wave are wind strength, wind duration, and the distance it blows over, and that is called its fetch. You should be able to draw and label the Earth-Moon system with its tidal bulges, and you should also be able to relate the sun's gravity between spring and neap tide. Also, make sure you can correlate lunar phase. A high spring tide would correspond with a new moon or a full moon. Why are the coastal waters called the ocean's nurseries? Well, because 80% of the life at sea comes coastal for reproduction. And then how do we combat beach erosion? With the seawalls and the groins and the beach nourishment, things like that that we discussed. So that is the review for the upcoming quiz. Now we can begin our tour, and before we look at the PowerPoint I developed for this tour, let's go over the instructions for the report, which is due next Wednesday. Remember, this Wednesday you have your current events, which was pointed out to me that I had the wrong file uploaded, so I uploaded the correct file, and the quiz that we just reviewed for. So we're looking at how hydrology affects habitats. And you can see here's a picture of Lake Maggiore. Here's the Boyd Hill Nature Preserve. Lake Maggiore is a estuary. It's connected to Tampa Bay by Salt Creek. So it does have tidal flow up and into it. And it also has freshwater flow out depending on low tide and high tide. It's a very interesting habitat. It is low salinity. It leans toward the fresh, but it definitely has saltwater influence. A lot of saltwater fish live there as well. A lot of freshwater fish live there. It's very unique habitat in that way. It's an old sinkhole because we were center state about 10, 12,000 years ago before sea levels rose. The Florida platform, we were kind of toward the center of it. This is a big sinkhole that is now connected to salt water. So that's how it gets its unique hydrology. When you look at hydrology, the study of water, we can look at hydric habitats. Hydric habitats are wet. They're either always underwater, which would be Salt Creek, Lake Maggiore, or they can be wetlands, which means they're seasonably covered in water. So a wetland is a transition between dry, which would be more mesic, and wet, which would be our lake itself. So we get anaerobic conditions when it's inundated. Ooh, pardon me. So the things that live there have to be able to put up with that. We do have videos from the swamp woodlands, Willow Marsh, and Lake Maggiore. I'd like to point out to you this term, karst topography. That is the topography of Florida. It's a German term, karst. It does refer to limestone that dissolves in the in water. So you get sinkholes, which we do. You get springs, which we have. It's a relatively flat, rolling, slightly rolling from sinkholes and smaller mounds, but it's a pretty fairly flat. You don't have mountains in Florida, we know. It has been formed by the rise and fall of sea level, and we are connected to the bay. So this is a sinkhole, which is part of karst, but connected to the bay via Salt Creek. That's tidal flow. Mesic is the in-between habitat. It's relatively dry. It's moderate. You get a fair amount of moisture as well. So more of a forest or some grassland. They're fire dependent in Florida. You may or may not know this, but Pinellas County, lightning capital of the world. That's what it has been called, although we're probably top 5. I wouldn't say we're number 1, but we call ourselves the lightning capital of the world because of all those lightning strikes. Most of our plants are adapted to being burned. It releases the nutrients and replenishes the soil. Some of these plants have special adaptations, like the bark on the slash pines is peel away, and others, like their cones, only germinate when scorched. The cool gopher tortoise is a keystone species in fire adapted landscapes, which would be our mesic and xeric landscapes. They dig a long burrow, and other organisms hide in that burrow when there's fires. So that keystone species is a species that helps other species survive. And the gopher tortoise helps other species survive by creating a burrow that is safe haven when fire sweeps the area. The xeric landscape is drier. We don't have true deserts here, but we do have what we call dune relics. Again, dune relics are huge mounds of sand that are in exposed area. And exposed areas they're really hot in the day and they cool off better at night. They don't host a variety of plants. I mean, they do have some cool plants like the turkey oak, but they're generally smaller and they're drought resistant. They're shrubs and faster growing herbaceous plants. The dune relics are windblown sand. That is a leftover from where more the center of the state, where we were dry, we were more grassland, semi-arid, fairly dry when we were away from the Gulf and warm. And some of these exist, only about 2% of the original, but it's patchy. So this describes the hydrology classes in Florida. Your trip report, please take the time to do this as a separate file. Don't type answers in little paragraphs down here. Make a cover. Now, location description, I'll show you several descriptions. I would like a description from each location filmed at, a brief description. Then a list of all the major living things discussed in the videos. Somebody just logged in late and left their mute on. If you would double for me, that'd be great. List by habitat, and here they are: hydric, mesic, and xeric. List by habitat, and then where they were found, either in the lake itself or on shore, willow marsh, cypress swamp, and then the organism, whether it's a producer, a consumer, or a decomposer. Producers, we're going to study marine ecology shortly. Producers are photosynthetic. So you would have trees, plants, algae. Consumers would be your animals. And decomposers, fungus, and some insects could be thrown in the decomposers. The questions you would want to answer in full sentences. Here's the questions below. If you watch the videos, then you should be able to pull the answers directly from the videos. If you use any resources outside of it, please list them at the end of the report. Let's say you look up karst to get a little better handle on things. So this should be turned in a Word file next Wednesday. So that is the assignment. Let's take a look at beautiful Boyd Hill. Why is I don't want to be paused. Let's stop and reboot it. Share screen, share. Perfect. All right. So again, this is the image from the assignment just to show you. There's the airport, downtown St. Pete. There's Salt Creek. Salt Creek leads into Lake Maggiore. There's a little spillway there. Water does flow into and out of that. So it is a estuary. Let's move this up here first. Okay, so an estuary, body of water where fresh water and flows into salt water. It's not as salty as 35 parts per thousand, but it's saltier than your fresh water, so we call that water brackish. And Lake Maggiore is an ancient sinkhole that connected the Gulf via a spillway at Salt Creek. In our briefing, we went through the 3 different habitats: hydric, mesic, and xeric. So what we have here is a transition for saltwater. Kind of cool. Alligators were in there. And so I got a few pictures of some alligators. And you should not feed the alligators or molest them, by the way, but feeding them is important because then they would associate people with food and can get aggressive. Lake Maggiore is our first hydric habitat, the lake itself, old sinkhole. And then in the lake, we'll look at some of the plants in a bit. We have 2 types of plants that can live in water. They are emergent and submergent. This is a great transition into our next unit, marine biology. An emergent plant is partially underwater, partially above water. In the marine environment, we look at salt marsh grasses, like Spartina. That is our local. And the mangroves, we can add to that cattails and several other in more of a fresh, brackish water environment. The willow marsh, a marsh is an area of land which is only flooded during wet seasons or high tide. So it is a salt marsh or a freshwater marsh. It is underwater part of the time. A swamp is underwater more often than the marsh, but can have dry seasons. Unique to our swamp here in Florida are the bald cypress trees. Here's a picture of bald cypress trees. I have a few other pictures as well. The bald cypress tree is the only needle-bearing tree. It's a coniferous tree. It's the only one that loses its needles, so it's not evergreen, and that's how it got its name bald. You can see these are all cypress knees sticking up because the soil is anoxic. So these knees aerate the soil. Another common swamp is called the swamp maple, and it's found a lot in these hydric habitats. That's the red maple. The pine flatwoods, now we've transitioned, we're no longer in hydric. These pine flatwoods are mesic. And then hammocks. Hammocks are mesic as well. A hammock is a forest, a maritime forest, or a bunch of trees. So your pine and your deciduous trees are trees that lose their leaves. Those are both the mesic. And then our xeric is the scrub and the sand scrub habitat. That is the xeric. So let's take a look at some pictures. So the first ones are from the hydric. Here's the cypress swamp that I was referring to. This is off of the boardwalk. There are the cypress knees. You can see they're buttressed as well. These trees, they have a thick at the bottom of the trunk to stabilize them in unstable soil so they don't fall over. And you can take, this is from a oceanography field trip. You can take right through the swamp woodlands and all the water lettuce up on top. There's an anhinga. You can also see here you have a snowy egret. If you were to take marine biology or studying the marine environment, we do a lot of bird identifications as well. Limpkin, and we found this cool leaf-footed bug walking around as well. And we had the monarch butterfly on the alkali. Well, the thing about the monarchs are cool. They're a migratory butterfly, so the monarchs are only here part of the year. And they eat on very, very astringent, that means very high in pH, plants like milkweed. And it makes their flesh, it's not toxic to kill a bird, but it makes it very, very bad tasting, makes the bird very sick. So that is their natural defense, is they take these chemicals from the plants they eat, and it's in their tissue. Makes them gross to eat, and if a bird were to eat one, it would never eat one again. So they're protected by their bad taste. And of course, in our swamp woodlands, the top predator is the Florida gator. The willow marsh, and there's actually a nice stream flowing around Lake Maggiore. Here you have I'm not sure if it's fragrant water lily or spatter dock because it's not in flower. And then a little bit of water lettuce, and there's a lot of water lettuce and a great blue, enjoying it. More water lettuce and moorhen. Here's Lake Maggiore off of an island in Lake Maggiore, and you can see there's emergent vegetation. That emergent vegetation is cattails. In the mesic habitats, okay, now you're seeing not a lot of water. That's cool. Here's wild coffee. We drink we roast and drink the beans, and these are coffee beans as well. Of course, they're not from volcanic soil in the mountains, so my guess is they'd be awful, but it is a variant of coffee. And this beauty berry people make jam out of. Here's another decomposer, this bracket fungus. And the red maple or the swamp maple has 3 lobes to its leaf. We do have a poinsettia in Florida. It's called the painted leaf. It's in that poinsettia family. So and we know the holiday season's fast approaching. So stores will be full of poinsettias. And this is not quite as glamorous as our Christmas poinsettias are around these parts, but that is a naturally grown Florida plant. Now our xeric habitats, which are more dry. One of my favorite are these turkey oaks. This turkey oak here they don't grow tall. It makes the acorns like oaks do, but look at the leaves. They say that looks like a turkey's foot. So it got the turkey oak. They're very adapted to dry climate like the sand pines are. Here, this is the apron to a gopher tortoise burrow. And like I said, these are a keystone species because they provide shelter during fire events. We also here have a little red-headed woodpecker up in a snag. A snag is a dead tree. Raptors like ospreys nest in them. Some of the common plants that we find in Boyd Hill through our tours. We mentioned the slash pine. Here's the range of the slash pine. It's a fast-growing long needle pine. We get longleaf, maybe some loblolly, not too many this far south, but the slash pine is really the most prevalent. It's faster growing than the others, and it's well adapted to our habitat. We also get 2 maples. We get the Florida sugar maple and the red maple. Now the red maple is adapted toward wetter climate, and the sugar maple not so much. The sugar maple has 5 lobes on its leaf, while the red maples have 3. This is that famous maple seed that can blow on the wind like a little helicopter, and each one contains 2 seeds, so they disperse on the wind. We do have several oaks in Florida. The live oak and laurel oak are very similar. You can tell by differences in bark and branch structure, but they're very, very similar. The water oak is definitely found as an emergent plant. And then the turkey oak, which you saw, is a sandy, dry soil in the full sun. Here again is our cypress. The bald cypress is the only needle-bearing plant to lose its needles. An epiphyte is a plant that grows on another plant, but it's not a parasite. A parasite would pirate the plant's fluid for its own benefit. This just grows on the other plant. Now, poison ivy is a vine. and some of it's freestanding like here, but it is also epiphytic. It will grow up another plant and attach to it. This love vine is a parasite. You can see it is parasitic, so it does damage the plant it's on. Creeper won't really damage the plant that it's on, but it could smother it by being too much. The Spanish moss and the air plants are two epiphytes that belong to the same family, the bromeliad. You're probably familiar with a very tasty bromeliad, the pineapple, and that is in the same family as the Spanish moss and the air plant. Some invasive species, which are here, don't belong here and do environmental damage. One of them grows up in the canopy. It is the air potato. This Australian pine is not really a pine. These aren't real needles. They're actually seeds off of flowers, so it's not a pine, although it does have needle-like structures for leaves. We love this Australian pine. Planted it all over. It grows fast. It's hardy. The problem with it is it has shallow root system, so it falls down pretty easily during windstorms. So recently we've been spending a lot of money removing these because they've become a nuisance. Now the big worst damager is the Brazilian pepper, also called the Florida holly. It does have this alternating leaf with a terminal leaf here, and then it does make these little peppercorn type berries when it's in season. The birds love it and spread the seeds all over, so it's very, very invasive, very aggressive. And skunk vine grows up things and it smells really bad, hence the name skunk vine. It's a invasive species, as well as kudzu. Kudzu is an invasive species that's been around since the 1800s. Some of the floating aquatic plants, you have water lettuce, and here's the fragrant water lily. It has a white flower. Spatterdock has a yellow bulb, not a white flower. So that's how I can tell the difference, but you can also see this leaf has that cut in it. The pennywort kind of looks a little like dollarweed. The floating heart. There's your spatterdock. This is yellow, more of a heart-shaped leaf. Mosquito fern. Eelgrass communities typify Lake Milgori. Hydrilla is a common aquarium plant. And so is coontail. It's a common aquarium plant harvested right from our ponds. We have a lot of this on the St. Pete College Seminole campus. Cattails are an emergent. See, these are submergent under the water, emergent coming out of the water, and pickerel weed. Cool flowers on the pickerel weed, purple, heart-shaped leaf sticking up. Arrowhead is cool. It has white flowers on top of it, and then small torpedo grass. Now, one of Boyd Hill's big events is the Raptor Fest, and they do have an aviary. So I included a couple pictures of the raptors. The videos we should see more. But here, you know, you have the great horned owl, the bald eagle, the red-shouldered hawk, and its larger red-tailed hawk. I see a lot more red-shouldered hawks where I live than red-tailed hawks. As I said, Lake Milgori is an estuary, salt water mixed with fresh water, and it's a typical eelgrass community. Eelgrass. We're going to learn about seagrasses in our next unit. Eelgrass. There's some eelgrass right there. The saltwater fish that live there: bay anchovy, snook, killifish, hog choker, ladyfish, pinfish, redfish, sand perch, sheepshead minnow, striped mullet, tarpon, and then the mohara. The freshwater fish that live there, you have your bluegills, mosquito fish, bullhead, gar, shad, shiners, silversides, inland silversides, which are, we do have a saltwater silverside as well. Red ear sunfish or shell cracker, they love snails. Largemouth bass, mollies, killifish, shad, and the warmouth. And then some exotics are tilapia and armored walking catfish. I was fortunate enough to do a fish study with the Fish and Wildlife of Florida for several years. And I also got to bring students along on some of our trips. We would survey fishes and take population studies. And I got a lot of pictures. We'll go through some of the fish as part of our tour. We would electrocute them. They wouldn't die. We'd shock them. They'd float to the surface, and we'd pull them up with rubber nets. And then we'd weigh them, measure them, count them, whatever we were studying at the time, and then return them. So here's the Seminole killifish. It's got this mouth that whoop goes out. Here's a threadfin shad, threadfin herring, which it's very similar to our great ocean bait. Saltwater fish, the bay anchovy, that is the most abundant fish in Tampa Bay. This relic is the Florida gar. The mosquito fish have this mouth pointing up, and they eat larvae off the surface. Here's the gizzard shad. They actually have extra chambers in their digestive system called the gizzard. The shiners here are world-class bass fishing bait, very expensive. The bottom-feeding bullhead have sharp spines, and they are in the catfish family. There's a bluegill. There's the shell cracker or red-eared sunfish. The largemouth bass. There's another one, student got. Here's the blue tilapia and the black chin tilapia. They are mouth brooders. They carry their eggs in their mouth, and then the eggs hatch. And you can see here some of the eggs hatched when we caught them, and the fry swim off afterwards. The armored catfish, they are exotics, and we can buy them, and they are there because of the pet industry. They're called placostomers or placos in a pet store. Another exotic, you can buy these as well in pet stores, are the walking catfish. They can actually move from pond to pond during times of drought. The common snook is fairly common here in the state. It's a sought after game fish. It's also found at Lake Magloire. And here's a whole bunch of snook that we caught in our study. And this is the biggest one we found in Lake Magloire. Granted, we didn't necessarily see all of them, but this was the largest one that we tagged. We spent a couple of years catching snook and tagging them is part of a fish migration study that Florida surveys. And you get a free t-shirt if you catch a fish with a tag and get the tag number and call it into FWC. So that was kind of an exciting scientific endeavor that I was part of. And that was the biggest one I got to tag. The mullet are common. They are plankton eaters. They're the ones that jump out of the water. mullet. You're not going to catch them on a hook because they eat plankton. Here's a lot of tilapia. They're very common, and that's a bluegill right there, but a lot of tilapia. Tilapia are very useful fish in aquaculture because they eat garbage and excrement, whatever. So they're the cleaner uppers. When you run a fish farm, you obviously got a lot of refuse and the tilapia clean it right up. Then you can sell that and make a lot of money off the tilapia as well. Here's some of the snook and the bass in the same habitat. That is a rarity. Only in an estuary do you get the king of freshwater fish, the largemouth bass, and the king of saltwater fish, around these parts at least, the snook. Only in an estuary do you get both. And some other sites you can see, you got the white ibis and the ahinga. The ahinga has the pointed beak and the cormorant has a little hook on the beak. Ahingas are more apt to be found in the freshwater, and cormorants are more apt to be found in the estuaries or salty water. That's, obviously there's many violations to that rule, but that's the general rule of thumb, that the fresher the water, the more ahinga you find. The moorhen, and there's red maple, how it got its name, because its underlying pigment is red. Our cypress with the knees to aerate. Emergent vegetation cattails, and because it's brackish, you also get there's the laughing gull and the royal tern, so you get a variety of fresh and saltwater species. There's a cormorant over there. Cormorants are neat birds. They don't have oils on their skin and in their feathers. They're diving birds, and oil, is less dense than water. So they can dive very, very deep, and the oils would just hold them back because oil would make them more buoyant. So they lack the oils, but they need to thermoregulate because their skin gets wet, so they have to open their wings and dry and warm up on shore. So you often see the cormorants and the anhingas with their wings spread to regulate thermally. Again, other wildlife, the top predator in this particular estuary is the Florida gator. The red-winged blackbird is a common bird in marshes. And there's another anhinga, pointed beak. So we can kiss this Boyd Hill presentation goodbye. That's me a long time ago. Woo! I was a young scientist back then. But that is the presentation for today. The Boyd Hill. Let me show you before I cut you loose where everything is. Let's see, where are we? I could have swore, hold on. I could have swore I had our, I do have it up, okay. There we go. All right, so on the course content, we will first look at the midterm, or not the midterm, the finals module. To the lectures, I added the hydrology of Boyd Hill to that to help you with your report. Today or tomorrow, I'm going to whip up the PowerPoint on Fort DeSoto and the barrier islands, and I'll include that here. And that's what we'll be doing the next class. So we will throw that here and have that for as a resource as well. Okay. Now, weekly activities. And virtual field trip. Here are all the videos associated with the trip. Please watch these. They're not very long. A couple are a couple minutes. Some are even shorter. We're looking at eutrophication of Lake Maggiore, general taxonomy, the aviary. So there's a lot of cool. We tour the dune relics and talk about the different wild coffee, gopher, tortoise. So it's enjoyable. I had a great time filming them, so I hope you have a good time watching them. The videos for Fort DeSoto and the field trip and a whole presentation on Wednesday. Tomorrow is Discovery Day, which means nobody has any classes. Just a reminder, I know we don't meet on Tuesdays, but if you're taking a Tuesday class, you have the day off tomorrow because the college hosts a whole bunch of workshops for all of their employees. So tomorrow, everybody is off. That concludes today's lesson. Any questions regarding the program or the quiz, the review, or anything along those lines?
I have a question for the assignment that for the field trip.
Okay.
Is that just for the Boyd Hill or is it going to be for all of them?
I'm confused with your question. We just covered the Boyd Hill today.
Yeah. Is that like, is the assignment that's due next Wednesday?
Yes,
Just on
yes, that's
Boyd
the
Hill?
Boyd Hill.
Okay.
The Fort DeSoto is in the extra credit folder.
Okay.
It's important that we learn about our local ecosystem. So I'd like to use the class to teach us about barrier islands, but that will be an additional assignment and optional to earn points toward your final grade.
All right. Thank
Okay?
you.
You're welcome.
May I ask, this homework assignment, what event and quiz for, it's before the 27 October. What the time?
I'm not sure. It's the, yeah, it's a, I don't know what you're asking.
Yeah, I asking about homework. It says deadline on 27 October. And my question is 27 October night, 27 October middle of the day.
Well, it's always due right here where it says right on the thing, 11:59 p.m. right on your.
Ah, oh, sorry, yes, I'm not so sorry. Yes, thank you.
Yeah. Okay, no problem. I was just confused what you're asking, but yeah, the time is right on our calendar. All right. Well, have a great day, everybody.
Hey, this is Artesia. Do you know if air potato is edible?
I wouldn't eat it. I don't know off the top, so I don't want to mislead you.
Okay. All right. Have a good one.
You
I'm
too.
gonna chime in. It's not edible.
Okay, I wouldn't eat it, but
No, it's toxic.
okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't want to mislead anyone. I don't have the knowledge of the whole world. Great. Well, have a great day.